Why don't I kick us off then? I'll do my intro and we can flow right into this.
Mhm.
So, hi everyone, great to meet you. Thanks for joining us. I'm Lou Sabag, and my company's Publish Today Media. I've been working with Chris and Mike for a couple few years now, doing websites and learning about ADA compliance. I've organized the Boston Internet Marketing Meetup for over 10 years now, and that kind of was the impetus to get us going here and try to do an online version of this now that we're in the COVID days. So I do kind of a full spectrum of online marketing, some foundational stuff and some very sophisticated stuff as needed, and have fun doing it. One of the things with the meetup was it just gave us a test kitchen to go try stuff and do educational sessions. So that was exactly the premise here. So I've done countless websites over the years, and then the integrations. I call it the what next once the website's done, and just getting a website on a good footing with SEO and what are your keywords and how does that get baked into the site. But I have some big network groups with lots of attorneys and professionals, and I'm always hearing stories about their client got sued and something happened and they got the letter. So it's like a little bit of a ticking time bomb where you have a website and pretty much anybody is a target, but the bigger you are and the more public you are, the more chances you have of somebody, taking issue with that. So around a website, it's like it's still I call it your house. It's built on the land that you own, which is like your URL, and that SEO and the keywords, that's your foundation. And everybody takes a buyer journey trying to figure out, how do I solve this issue? And your website is more often than not where your brand lives. Your educational component, and I call it educating someone to be a client, should generally live there. And it's your conversion place too, whether they call, click, download, buy it right there. That's generally still happens at that website stage. So it's all critical. And whenever I look at a website or, anything in marketing, be it an email or a post, there's three questions that kind of sit there. It's like, where am I? What is this place? What can I do here? And most importantly, can I solve my problem? Whether it be fix my website or, where I'm looking to go for lunch. And then the key question around all this stuff is, what do I do next? And especially towards, people in a ADA kind of world, whether you're sight impaired or hearing impaired, if they can't do that on your website, that's a problem.
Mhm.
So here's Mike McKenna to share with how to figure it out and get a handle on it and avoid getting that letter from some law firm you don't want to hear from.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. So I'm going to dive in. This is a presentation that I've made a few times in person. It's the first time I've done it in a Zoom. So if there's some technical issue or I'm going too slow, too fast, just give me a yell, and I can adapt accordingly. And again, like I said, this is being recorded, and I'll also I will send along a PDF of this PowerPoint when we're done. So the first thing to think about is the question, what is web accessibility? And the best way I can answer that is it's a concept in essence. And so what's going on right now is we're trying to educate the public on the fact that the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to websites and apps just like it does to a restaurant or a theater or any other place of public accommodation. So just like we have to make sure people can get in and out of the town hall, regardless of whether they're in a wheelchair or need a cane or have crutches or any of that, or that they can go to a theater or the supermarket, same thing applies to digital entities. So some quick numbers. It's estimated that as much as 20% of the US population has some kind of disability. And some of those disabilities lead to some serious barriers for web use. And at first it seems a little far-fetched perhaps, but when you think about it, people who have visual impairment or blindness, people who have auditory impairment, and people who have dexterity issues all have challenges that you and I don't have when it comes to accessing basic information on the web. And so the bottom line is that we've got to make our websites and our apps accessible to everybody. The question is, how do you do that? So the interesting thing is that the tools and best practices have been around right from the beginning. So Jill, you're doing a W3C thing. They had standards for this kind of stuff way back in the 90s when the web hit. I was lucky enough to be a college student in 1995, 96 when the graphical web landed. I remember going home for Christmas break. When I came back, the computer labs had like yahoo.com on them, and I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. It was just visual stuff. And going right back to then, tools like JAWS and other software, which we'll get into in a few minutes, they worked with the web. And what's happened over time is that as we've pushed the envelope, designers, Jill and Vanessa with your team, and here at Shotgun Flat, as we've pushed the barriers of what the visuals can do and like how interesting and interactive and visually stunning we can make websites. As an industry, as we've done that, as we've pushed those barriers, we've sort of left accessibility in the dust. So the movement now is to say, okay, we can still do all this great visual stuff, but we've got to include the accessibility along with it like it used to be. And the good news, we'll get into that, is that it's not as hard as it seems. So the tools are there. There's best practices, the standards that are actually put out by the W3C, WCAG 2021, all that stuff is there as a set of standards for us to follow to make sure that our websites meet the needs of all users. And basically, just like there's a proper way to wire a house or a garage or put a ceiling fan in or put a dimmer switch in, there's also a proper way to code a website. There's also lots of other ways that you can do it to arrive at a working light switch or a working website, but behind the walls, those wires may not be correct and it could lead to trouble. That's kind of the best analogy that I've been able to come up with up to this point. So basically what I'm saying is, by following best practices and kind of following the standards that are set, we've done our part. And then the adaptive technology that exists takes care of the rest for us. So really what we're doing is we're coding our websites according to standards so that these special software and hardware devices can use those standards to deliver the content to customers who need it. A couple of examples of that. The most popular one is a product called JAWS. JAWS, there's hardware and software involved with JAWS. Some of it is, some of the offerings that they have are as simple as a screen reader that will like literally read the content of your web page to you. So it'll read across the screen, and then so it goes left to right, top to bottom. It'll read the navigation. And if you go to the About Us, it'll say About Lou, and then you can learn it, and it'll read you Lou's bio. And this allows people who are blind or have visual impairment to hear the screen read to them. They've also done some amazing technological stuff recently with things like it's almost like a malleable, refreshable Braille display that you can touch that can update. So they can read Braille on this little tab. It's almost like a touchpad of a computer, a laptop, but it can display Braille on it. So it can read the site and then translate it into Braille in this sort of touchable, almost gel-like touchpad. So you can literally read the site. And for this stuff to work properly, we need to code our sites up to standards so that both sides of the conversation, the web creators, and then these adaptive technology folks can talk and can communicate and get information to the user. Some other simpler examples are like closed captioning. If your website has video on it, you're doing an intro video. Hi, I'm Charlie. This is what my company does. You need to have captioning on that video so that people who can't hear it can read it. All right. So that's another one that's pretty common. And then people with dexterity issues. This could be older users who have arthritis. It could be people who've been who have had an amputation or were injured. Literally, I've done some video research on people who come back from Afghanistan or Iraq and need to have assistive technology so that they can use the web to check their bank balance, for example, because they can't use the keyboard anymore. And there's things that you can do around dexterity where you can simply use the tab or the enter keys in the keyboard to navigate from one point on the site to the next. But if you don't code the site to allow for that, people end up getting kind of stranded. So I talk a little bit about the law. This has been going on since about 2017 now, where courts around the country, it kind of started in a federal court in Florida, and it's moved across the US from there, basically have determined and confirmed to one another that the ADA applies to the web, even though the ADA itself predates websites. So when the ADA was signed into law, there was no World Wide Web yet. The courts have determined that the spirit of the law of ADA applies to new technology like the web and like apps. So that's one argument for those of you who have web clients. One argument you'll hear is, well, how can something that's that old apply to something so new? The federal government has said basically it has, and figure out how to make it happen. So we've had some clients that have said, this is stupid, we're not dealing with this, it's frivolous. That ship has kind of sailed at this point. And the law, federal courts have determined that you got to do it. And this applies to everybody, large and small. A couple cases I'll get into. Famous ones. Winn-Dixie is the big one. I don't know if you've heard of this case or not, Jill and Vanessa, but in 2017, a blind customer went to the Winn-Dixie site. They had just invested millions of dollars in a new site. And basically what happened was there was a blind customer who wanted to use the website to shop. He was looking for sort of coupons or to join the same kind of discount club that everybody else was joining. And he also wanted to renew a prescription at the Winn-Dixie because they have an in-house pharmacy there. He couldn't do it. And so he filed an ADA lawsuit against Winn-Dixie. Winn-Dixie fought it. It went to the highest level of the federal court in Florida, and Winn-Dixie lost that suit. And that was the first time on record that we saw a plaintiff win one of these complaints. There had been other ones in the past, but this was the first one that the plaintiff won. So basically, what happened there was it went to, because ADA is a federal law, these lawsuits are always in federal courts for the most part, except for California, which we'll get into. But basically what happened was this went all the way to the district court, federal court in Florida, and Winn-Dixie lost. The one that's been even more high profile recently within the last 6 or 8 months has been the Domino's case, where basically same thing happened. A customer sued Domino's because the website wasn't accessible to him, and the plaintiff won. And Domino's appealed, had basically a strategy all along of just to appeal this to the bitter end. And basically what happened was, it was this past summer, I think. Chris, correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think it was just the summer of, this summer of 19, where when
the Supreme Court started the season.
Yeah, this current session, right? They decided, this had been brought all the way to the Supreme Court, appealed to the Supreme Court, and they denied the hearing. And they basically said, we're not going to hear this because the lower court has it right. So while they didn't hear it and they didn't make an opinion on it, by pushing it back to the previous decision, they've in essence said, this is correct. You need to make your website accessible. So those are a couple of big guys. And the first thing that we hear people say is, well, those are huge companies that people are going after, and they're not going to bother my payroll service client, right? Or they're not going to bother Think Kids. All right, that one's recording. And Jonathan is there. Hey, Jonathan.
Hey.
So I know you jumped in a little late, but I will send a PowerPoint, well, a PDF of the PowerPoint, and also recording this, so you can catch up on a little bit of the background stuff that we were going over before you came on.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming back, everybody. So basically, where I was I was starting to talk about the smaller clients, the smaller businesses that we're seeing that are also affected by this. So one of them is a client of ours called Kogo's. Kogo's is a chain of gas station and convenience stores in the Midwest and in Pennsylvania. And they hired us a few years back to do a new website, a new design, redesign, recode. But one of the pieces that they were particularly interested in for this was web accessibility. And basically what had happened was they had settled with a customer who had sued Kogo's for accessibility issues. And the most interesting thing of all was that the complaint, they sent us the consent decree that they signed with the plaintiff, and literally the complaint was literally verbatim to the Winn-Dixie report. And that's the first time we sort of saw a situation where there were copycat type website lawsuits that we were expecting to see, and we have seen that across the country. So basically, what's happened is people take the same complaint, they go through the phone book, and they just start serving up scary letters to people. So we've had firsthand experience with this with one of our clients.
Hey, Mike, I'll chime in on that too. I saw one thing. There was one, and I call them poaching law firms. You know, they're on the hunt for these opportunities, and they've had a couple of where they've sent, you know, from the court system, cease and desists to those law firms. And like this one here, there was one in particular where the same guy was the plaintiff on like 350 different suits. Right. So there's a game here to make money too, but at some level it's very real. So I know you're kind of getting sniped by people.
Yeah, that's right. And the part of the reason for that, Lou, is the way that ADA law works is, let's say Jill owns a restaurant, and someone comes in and she has some ADA violations, like maybe the restroom isn't accessible, the ramp doesn't meet standards, whatever it might be. They can come through and make a complaint of ADA violations against the restaurant, and then they give you a certain amount of time to fix those problems. So they're going to say, Jill, you have 60 days to fix the ramp and the restrooms, put in handles, lower the sink, whatever it might be. And then what happens basically is if you fix those problems and they meet and you satisfy the inspection and they meet the requirements, you're all set. There's no further damages. There's nothing that you have to worry about. So the only cost you would have incurred was the cost to fix the problems. However, if you fix 9 out of 10 of them and you leave one unfixed or unresolved, then what happens is you can suffer from fines, and also the whole complaint is considered unmet, and you have to pay the legal fees of the plaintiff. So that's where this kind of drive-by stuff comes along from. They call it surf-by lawsuits. So you put off 50 of them and you hope 2 of them stick, right? Basically.
Yeah. Hey, one other part too, Mike, is to what I understand is not only is it the client side, it's the agency or web developer is equally liable, and they are sued as well. So, you know, no one can just say we decided not to do it or we didn't know. It's like that is not going to be the answer.
Yep. And so like website by Shotgun Flat in the footer on a non-compliant site leaves us very much exposed as well, for an example. And the other thing is to deal with that, let's say Vanessa hires Shotgun Flat to help with a project. Vanessa and so Clockwork and Shotgun Flat might have some agreement that says we won't sue you if we're sued, right? But that doesn't matter to the plaintiff. They can still go after us completely separately, and so it is a problem that needs to you need to partner up with your web designer or your web maintenance team to help you with this. Another thing is it's not just big businesses. This is a little boutique hotel in California, in Palm Springs. I think they're 9 rooms or 12 rooms, something like that. They got hit with the lawsuit. It was going to cost them $2,000 or $3,000 to fix their site, and they ended up just like pulling down whole pieces of functionality right off the site and said, we're not even going to bother. So if you go to their site to this day, it'll say, sorry, just call us if you want to book a room. So we want to avoid that problem too, because now we're taking away from the experience and the presentation of the business to a user. So some people are just kind of throwing their hands up because it's just too costly to fix it. We want to avoid that, obviously. So far, just kind of a break point with this presentation. What we've learned so far, federal courts are now repeatedly ruling and confirming that websites have to be accessible. Apps do too. Those fall under the ADA. Businesses are at financial risk by not ensuring that their sites are accessible, both from a fine standpoint, from a legal cost standpoint, and of course, if you really get deep into it, you have to pay the legal fees of the complainant, and those can be very hefty. And that these complaints are moving through both large and small businesses. Chris likes to bring up the example. There's an attorney in New York who literally just started filing lawsuits against art galleries because their websites weren't accessible. And you can see the court documents. It's literally like A through C on Monday, D through G on Tuesday, and it's opportunistic, but it's real. So, and that does sound ridiculous, but it's the truth that art galleries in Manhattan all get served up with one of these by the same guy. Anybody have any questions or comments up to this point?
I don't know if you're going to address this, but I was curious about what it would look like for a website to be ADA compliant. Like, what am I looking for on a website to know that it's compliant?
Yep. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that coming up.
Okay.
I have one quick question before you move on.
Sure.
I hadn't heard about the art galleries in New York. That's fascinating to me. Were these galleries that were literally, well, first I should ask, were these websites for galleries where they were selling online e-com, or were these just, you know, because my understanding was that most of the websites that were being targeted in these mass lawsuits were e-com sites.
Right. That's not always the case, Vanessa. And even in the art galleries, it was literally every art gallery. So even things like showing a portfolio of paintings, believe it or not. Yeah, so it's
how do you make that ADA compliant to somebody who can't see? I mean, you describe the painting?
You do.
Yeah.
You have to describe the painting. Now, this is absurd. I mean, this is a particularly ridiculous example.
Yeah.
Which is why we bring it up, because it's, even if that is ridiculous and you may end up winning that argument in court, you still have to go to court over it,
right,
rather than just fixing it now and avoiding that.
Mm-hmm.
It is absurd. And, you know, the sad thing is, you know, Chris and I talk about this a lot. We don't want this to be a thing where we are trying to scare people into fixing their websites.
Yeah.
You don't want to go with a lawsuit. Like, you could be the victim of a frivolous lawsuit. I mean, that's not what this is about, really.
Yeah.
You know, we want this to be so that legitimately disabled users can use the web to access information about their bank account, about their payroll service, about you know, their auto dealer, you know, hours when they can have a car dropped off, all that kind of stuff. And so it's unfortunate that there's been opportunism that goes along with it, but that kind of happens everywhere.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Jump in for one sec. This also happened on the Cape last summer.
That's right.
They started suing bed and breakfasts and small inns alphabetically. They started with the Anchors and the Bays and the Capes. So the same thing happened down there by, again, a frivolous law firm. I mean, predatory law firm.
Probably is a frivolous law firm.
A frivolous lawsuit for sure.
Yeah.
But it did happen on the Cape as well. Yeah.
So I think e-commerce, Vanessa, one of the things I've seen is that it was easier earlier on during this trend to make the case that if you had a brick and mortar business as well as a website, it was easier to make that jump
Mhm.
to say like ADA applies to you. And so that would imply that a lot of those would have e-commerce as part of their website. So supermarket chains, movie theaters, those kinds of places. More recently, we've seen it go right across to everyone.
Yeah.
Mike,
Yeah.
the phrase I see a lot is public accommodation
Yeah.
quotes, and that's that.
Yep.
Some combination of e-com, brick and mortar,
Mhm.
but that can be stretched pretty far too, I imagine, to just like a gallery site. Can the public just come in and look at stuff or
That's
not?
right. That's right. And one of the other ones, we're going to come up to this is in just a couple slides, but job application, the forms, if you're having a job application online, the form that you fill out to apply for that job has to be accessible, or you've got an issue. So you may not be a business that has a retail presence that people come into to shop. But if you have a job application, for example, online, and that form isn't accessible, you've got an issue. Just as another example. So some of the common problems, I'm just going to go into like what this really means. The good news in all this is that most sites that we've seen, that we've looked at, and we've looked at some stuff with Vanessa, and we looked at some stuff with Jill, most of the problems that we see that cause a site to be in violation, there's a very common set of issues across most websites. So we're seeing 8 or 9 out of 10 sites have the same kinds of issues. And it's kind of tied to a common set of either coding issues or content entry issues. So there's 2 ways that problems can come up. One of them is while the site's being built, the way that it's coded by the developer, there could be some fixes that need to happen there. The other way that it comes up is as you're building your website, as you're writing your blog posts, if you're not following best practices, you can post new pages to the site that break the accessibility. So a lot of, not to get too like nerdy on this, but things like alt tags. So these are common in photos. If you post a photo of a sailboat on the harbor, and then you don't describe that, there's an accessibility issue there with an alt tag. Form elements not being labeled. So if someone's using JAWS to tab along and here, what field are they supposed to fill in? If it just says form field, they don't know what to put in there, right? As opposed to saying form field, first name, then they know what to put there. So it's things like that to help people along. Videos not being captioned is a common one. Color contrast is a biggie. So especially for designers or design firms, you have a particular vision for the look and feel of a site. And then you have issues where you have one color text sitting on top of another color background. There's a particular contrast aspect ratio that we have to meet so that it's visible according to the standards. So this either means changing the text to be lighter or darker to meet the contrast requirements, or making the background color a different one. Good news on contrast for those of you who do design work, the larger the font, the lower the contrast ratio needs to be acceptable. So your headers, your large text, those things can be closer in color to the background, whereas things like footer text, copyright, privacy policy statement, those little things in the footer tend to be where we find the most issues. And a lot of times it just means brightening up that text a bit so it's a little bit more visible. And then the other big one is tab index. This is when you can sit there and literally use the tab key to jump from one piece of the page to another. So you can jump from home, about, services, products, contact, and then down into the content itself. It's all stuff that by following Jill, the course that you're taking, by following those rules, you'll be safe on all of these things.
Hey, Mike, I'll
Yeah.
throw this comment in. I've got a colleague / friend who's general counsel at a Boston, call it a sports-related startup. They have an international reach. They have thousands of pictures on their website, and
Yep.
none of the alt tags are done correctly.
Yep.
So the
problem.
task now of fixing all that is daunting, and that's what they're dealing with. It's going to take months.
Yep.
So when the site gets big and you got lots of problems, there's a multiplier effect. if you got 10 pages, not such a big deal, but it's those big sites that all of a sudden you got a lot of fixing to do.
Yep. And it's a lot of times we do find it's, there's 5 years of blog posts that go back.
Yeah.
And those are valuable posts. They're giving you good SEO juice.
Yep.
There's good content, relative content, but they're throwing a massive red flag on the accessibility front.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about that a little bit in terms of what people are looking for to cause trouble, basically, too.
I'll say even getting your alt tags named right on each page from an SEO perspective.
Yep.
It's dotting the I's and crossing the T's,
right.
and those pictures should be named accordingly to the core keywords of the page.
Yeah.
And then you're just doing a better job with your SEO in general as well.
Yep, that's right. So this slide here, this is what an image looks like to a screen reader if there's no alt tags. Whereas if you describe it correctly, it would look more like this. So the idea here is by putting in, when you upload a picture of 2 bunnies in a meadow, you need to describe it. Two bunnies in a meadow eating buttercups. That can then be read to the user and they can picture that in their minds, as opposed to if it just says photograph or image. This is what we're telling the user.
Mike, can I ask you a question about that? Is
Yeah.
there any detrimental, so like if I was describing this alt tag and it was on the more advertising site, would it have a negative impact if I described this as more advertising's, website, 2 bunnies in a grassy meadow? So kind of adding that, I guess, like those SEO keywords in the beginning, like,
Yep.
I could see where it would get annoying, but is it detrimental?
It wouldn't be detrimental in terms of running an accessibility review of the site. You have given the photo a title. You've given it an alt tag. Think about the user though that would need those, and do they want to hear that every time? So from a user experience issue, you might have something to think about on that front. That would be annoying. You had a lot of photos, and every time it started with more advertising photo. And then you probably want to think about, does that really help you on the SEO front anyway? I don't know. That's
Right.
something I'm not as, you're way ahead of me on SEO.
Like, I was just thinking in terms of like, our staff page, it'd be like more advertising, CEO Donna, more advertising.
That
Yeah,
makes
I
sense.
think, yeah.
It's the other pages. Does it
Yeah.
add value and understanding? Otherwise, then it gets repetitive, and you could argue it's kind of spammy.
But I think on the team page, it's appropriate.
Yeah.
It's relevant to the photo itself. So just think about the user, put yourself in their shoes for a minute and help them, Forms are a biggie. I talked to this a little bit, but we find this is a common problem where form fields need to be labeled so that we put in there, you can put text before it that says first name and then the form element, the little field. But within that field element, you should name that first name so that if someone who's listening understands which form field they're in. This is big on search boxes, e-commerce, contact forms, job applications, logging into your online banking or whatever. This is all over the place. And this is one that we find very commonly needs a little bit of help. And it's just a matter of taking an extra half hour or an hour to spend time on that form and properly labeling and naming all those fields so that someone can hear the form. So these are the biggies where we find it. Blog posts, because a lot of times it's an easy corner to cut, frankly, to not, like Lou, like what you're talking about your friend who's dealing with. It's a heck of a lot easier to upload tons of photos if you don't have to then go in and type up the name, alt tag for each. An easy corner to cut. And this is one of those things, like I said in the beginning, that over time, as design has expanded and grown, and we can do so much more with the web than we could in 1997, this is one of those things that's been left in the dirt and the dust, is naming each photo appropriately. And then, so the big problem is, okay, it's only in the blog and it's only alt tags, but we've got 9 years of blog posts and we've got 3 a month for 9 years. That's a lot of posts that you have to go back through and deal with. And we've had to do that for some clients. Another one is iframes. So you pop in a Vimeo video or an iframe of a YouTube video. When you, believe it or not, when you copy that embed code and paste it into your site, by default, it's not going to be accessible because the iframes are typically missing some extra tags that you have to put in there to make them accessible. So just like the iframes basically have a similar, something similar to an alt tag where you say, this is an iframe of a YouTube video, so that they know that. But by copying and pasting that in, you've created some minor issues that you can fix. And it's not going to work to say, well, I got it from Google, go bother them. It's on your site. So like I said, the color contrast in the footer, gray on gray, light blue on dark blue, those kinds of things. You just have to darken or just increase that contrast. And then one that's kind of scarier is third-party plugins. So this is what was happening a lot with that hotel in LA and also on the Cape at these inns, is they're using a third-party reservation system, but they're plugging it into their website. And those reservation systems were not accessible. And that's where a lot of them got flagged. So they're paying for a monthly subscription or an annual subscription to a reservation tool, which is supposed to do a great thing. It's going to save the inn a ton of time to not have to answer the phone and check for reservations. The whole thing is automated. People can self-register. But we found that a lot of those are not accessible. And so it's actually a situation where it's better to not have that embedded on your site, but to push out to a third-party site itself and say, you can use this, warning, may not meet accessibility standards. Not the prettiest situation, and a lot of these guys are scrambling to get their tools to be accessible, but until they are, we can still be held responsible for those. And then WordPress, plugins, widgets, these things, one of the things that can happen is as standards change and we go from 2.0 to 2.1 and someday to 3.0, we need to make sure that all our plugins are coming along for the ride and not leaving you out of compliance down the road. So, great, I just scared you to death. What's the solution? The good news is there's a straightforward approach that you can take, understand the problems and what to do about them. So I'm going to go over that a little bit now too. So we can do we use some software to do a quick cursory view. So we've actually developed a tool at Adaptable that we can scan any website and get a very high level look at what are the types of problems. Is it alt tags? Is it form elements? Is it contrast? Is it something beyond that? And we can use that to get that initial look at how things are, how your site is. And Chris can actually do that for you afterward if you want. You can email. He's actually on the email with the link I sent along. Everybody's on that, so you could ask him. He can do a scan of your site or a site that you might know about. So the first thing is just to kind of take a quick high level look, like, do I have these common problems that most websites have, and how many do I have, and how deep does the problem go? Is it just on the homepage, or is it on 300 blog posts? Then once you kind of have a high level look, then you could take a look under the hood of the site to see really what's going on. Because one of the things that can come up is your alt tags aren't working, even though you're entering them, because a plugin that you have on a WordPress site isn't working properly and isn't publishing the alt tags. Maybe you think you are, and you type them in and you hit submit, but they're not storing to the database correctly. So there's those kinds of things to really look under the hood and understand what exactly is causing your problem. Next step is to execute. So you create a remediation plan. Here are all the problems. And then to actually roll your sleeves up, go in there, make the changes to the code, make the changes to the content, and then retest it to make sure that you're meeting the WCAG standards. And then the biggie is, that's still in there, Chris, so thank you. That's some sort of typo from the presentation we did on the Cape, and now I guess it's a tattoo. It's not a prayer saying hopefully it works this time. But the idea is to release that site and then monitor the site. So we have a monitoring service at Adaptable that we can use, that just like a Pingdom or a uptime.com that can tell you if your site's down. we have a tool that will notify us if a site goes back out of compliance. An example of this would be you hire a summer marketing intern and they go in to spruce up your blog post for one of your clients. They miss an alt tag. The next day we would get a notice telling us that that's happened and let you know. So it's important to not only fix it, but then to just keep following those best practices and stay on top of it as you grow your site, because you can fall back out of compliance. So coming to the end, accessibility, got to have it, got to do it. Your clients definitely should do it. For those of you who run agencies, it's attainable. It's not, I talk about Winn-Dixie, and they spent something like $2.x million on their new website, and then they had to set aside $250,000 in a fund for remediation to fix it. They didn't spend anywhere near that, but they had to take that money and freeze it up till they were satisfied. That's not what most people have to do. We've seen most sites, if we get in there, or someone like us can get in there and make fixes, it's a couple of weeks from start to finish, and it usually costs a lot less than the build of the initial website itself. Time is of the essence. I'd rather invest in fixing a site or bring it up to accessibility before I get that letter and have to deal with legal fees on top of still fixing it. So that's not my scare tactic. That's just that's what we think the best way to tackle this is to just get out in front of it and take care of it. There's a few things that you can do in the meantime while you're working on your site, while you're looking into fixing it. You can put a statement, like you have a privacy policy or a terms of service. You can put an accessibility statement in your footer, and then a user can link to that, and you can say, we recognize that accessibility is an important matter. We're working to fix the site now to bring it up, to make it accessible to everybody. In the meantime, call Jill if you need to access anything on the site, or you can email this address. So just by doing that alone, you're actually kind of removing yourself from that low-hanging fruit situation with frivolous lawsuits. So just by saying, we get it, we care about it, we're working on it. Today's date is, March 30th, April 30th. Wow, a month wrong. That gets you a step in the right direction, because we have seen recently a couple lawsuits were thrown out because the defendant was already in the process of fixing the site to begin with. And once they showed that, the suit was thrown out by the court. So by literally taking a step in the right direction and starting to work on accessibility, you can get a leg up on that kind of stuff, which is an important one. And it only takes 30 minutes to put together an accessibility statement for your site and say, we care about this, we're working on it, and we expect to be done by this date. That alone gives you buys you some time. So I believe that's the last slide in the PDF. So I'm gonna stop the share, and I'd love to answer any questions. Charlie, I know you had some stuff that you were asking about, like what's it look like? I can talk about that, and then any other questions anyone has, I'm happy to answer. So there's some tools out there that you can use that are free, Charlie, that you can check your website on. One of them is called the WebAIM. It's I'm going to share my screen in just a second. WEBAIM, and you can run your website through this, and it'll give you a quick look at how your site is doing on the accessibility front. That's called WebAIM. I'm just pulling it up now. Looks like this. And you can do it. Jill, you know this one?
Yep.
Yeah. So this is a good one to start with. You can type in your website right there, and get a kind of a high level digital kind of computerized review of how the site's doing. For those of you maybe a little more advanced on the web front, there's something called Google Lighthouse, which is a great tool that you can run your site through. It's a plugin for the Chrome browser, and that'll give you a score on a scale of 1 to 100 on where your website sits. So Charlie, one of the things that's interesting is that a lot of the issues you can't look and see with the naked eye. There are things behind the scenes in the code that are going to make the site work for someone who needs to listen to the content, for example. So it's hard to look at. The only one I could do just by looking at it and say this is a problem would be like contrast. If you had a yellow background with white text on it, I can tell you right away that's going to be a big problem. So most of the stuff has to do with how the site's built and how the content's added to it.
Have you guys dealt with issues regarding the wording in buttons? We've started wrestling with this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're wondering if there's any references out there with ideas. Like we've heard that a button that says learn more could be problematic because it's like learn more about what, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you just, to me, it seems so obvious. Okay, I've just read something. Now I want to learn more about it. But are there any sort of tools or advice as to those kinds of button language?
Yeah, it's an interesting one too, because it has to do with the content that it's related to, right? But I do think that if it says learn more, first of all, you should use text in your buttons instead of like a graphical button.
Oh, for sure.
You know, so you use your CSS to style it, and then so that's now legible to JAWS. But I do believe that you can give a button a name as well, like you can a form element, because buttons are technically form elements. So I believe you can have it say, I have to check with Drew or just do a quick search on this, but I believe you can name the button with more detail to say, learn more about Mike's fly fishing adventures or whatever it is. And
So
that,
to someone who is not visually impaired, it would just say learn more, but to somebody using a screen reader, it would say learn more about fly fishing tools.
Yep.
That would be cool.
So look at that name equals tag as part of a button. That's the just like off the cuff, Vanessa. That's where I would go first with that.
Okay.
I'll chime in. There's an SEO track in that too. You know, it's like from Learn More, where you can put that keyword that associates with the page to the next page. It's like as the Google bots crawling your site into the architecture from page to page. It's a better practice to don't just say learn more, have the about what and either the keyword phrase or from a compliance issue, what's the proper, identity for it.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, Vanessa, this I learned that so when you're using a screen reader, so they have the opportunity to not necessarily read verbatim from top to bottom. They can skip around and they can literally go from link to link to link. So if all the links on your page say learn more, learn more, learn more,
Exactly.
that's where you're getting into the problem.
Yes.
So that's
exactly. Yeah. That's what we were wrestling with and trying to figure out, well, what kind of language can we have that's short that would replace learn more, that would identify what they're learning more about.
Yeah.
But I like this idea of being able to do it more like a tag, so it doesn't become clunky and overbearing to the majority of visitors who can read that button.
That's right. And you run into this constant sort of push and pull with, we do want to have an accessible experience for everybody, but we, at the same time, we want to find a way to do so without making the site experience detrimental to everybody else. You got to find that middle ground.
Exactly.
We've gone beyond our time, so I don't know if anybody has to go. It's a little bit after 3, but
I'll stay and talk about this as long as you want.
Yeah.
But if you have to go, I won't. My feelings
don't be insulted.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for the presentation, Mike. Very informative.
Yeah, no problem, Charlie. Thanks for coming twice.
Good to meet everybody. Thanks for inviting me, Lou.
Appreciate you.
Thanks, you guys. I will look forward to getting the recording too, so I can share that with my team.
Absolutely.
Great.
Likewise, thank you.
All right, take care.
Okay.
I have
Thank
a
you, guys.
question.
Sure.
What does the audit process look like? So if we were to say start on not necessarily a new project, but a site that's already existing, want to do that, like what type of timeline does that involve?
Yep. So there's two steps to this. The first one is to take that sort of I wouldn't call it a quick look, but it is a kind of a quicker, high level review, because what we can do with that is turn up, like I said earlier in the talk, 95 out of 100 times, it's the problems reside in this cluster of 10 or 12 things that we see every time. And then if it's that, then we know, okay, there's not massive code related things that we need to deal with. It's the same stuff. It's the form elements, it's the alt tags. Then we can kind of say like, look, you're at like your Google Lighthouse score is coming in around 72 out of 100, for example. And even just by looking at that, we can see it's the big six, that are causing the problem. Then we can look under so that's just a day or two to kind of do that. Then we can say, all right, if we can get access to the back end and to the database, we can stage it and then really look and see what's going on. What's causing it? Is it because someone isn't typing alt tags in, or is it because there's a plugin that you're using that's creating or writing non-compliant code and inserting it onto the site? Is it the way that your HTML is written? Is it a form builder that you're using? Maybe you're using like Wufoo or something like that. Are those form elements coming out and being published onto the site in a non-compliant way? So that usually takes a little more time. Usually, we've actually worked with Vanessa on a number of projects for her clients. Chris, what do you think? It's usually 3 weeks, 2 weeks, start to finish, to do the fix.
We usually have an audit to the client in 48 hours. And then depending on the hours required and workloads, usually a couple of weeks, it's pretty well done.
Yeah.
What if you run into like third-party plugins that aren't accessible, and then you have to is that like where you have to find a new plugin, or you're creating custom code? Is that where it gets kind of wonky?
Yeah, that's one of the big ones. So I'll come back to you and you say, your in is using this third-party reservation tool and it's not accessible. Then we have to kind of get into kind of consultant mode with you and talk about what are your options, what else is out there, what could you use instead? Can you just simply move it to a situation where it's not embedded in your site, it's hosted on their site, and you have a speed bump like you'd have on a bank site when you leave to just let people know they're leaving. And it just kind of comes into exploring the options that you have to fix that. The thing with plugins is like, and you know this because you've done a bunch of WordPress stuff.
Problematic.
They can be a real pain. And you get a major security upgrade to do, and then it breaks your site because your plugins aren't ready for that upgrade. Same kind of thing can happen with the accessibility. Your site's great. All your code that you've written is clean. You're adding all your alt tags, but you get some plugin that's generating code for you intentionally, but it's not compliant. And at that point, you got to take a hard look at, are there other ways to arrive at this part of the user experience that we can replace this plugin with?
Have you ever run into any type of platform that kind of like qualifies plugins that are like accessible friendly, or does it really just have to look at it?
That's a good question. I think you just invented a new service, Joe. I haven't seen
It's
that.
recorded. No, just
Yeah, you said it, not me.
Witnesses.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, Joe. It's a good idea. I think, Chris and I, we've been working really hard at getting the word out on this stuff for a while, and it's just not something people are super excited about. You know?
Not sexy at all.
It's not sexy. It's not exciting. It sounds like a pain. I mean, you talk about audit now. You get like Drew and Casey are going to come in with name tags on and briefcases and go through your office, and it's not an exciting thing to think about, but it's super important. And we don't want the lawsuit angle to be the only reason people care about this either, you know.
Right.
But it's the reason I bring that up is it's just slow. People are slow to come around on it. And if you compare it to GDPR, where everybody like panicked and spent money to fix it, it was because they were told, okay, you can't do business in Germany anymore until you fix this. Like you're shut off.
Yeah.
And like once you shut off the hose, people pay attention, you know.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the reason why I've been starting to get so more into it is that like we have a lot of state clients, and they always, they make references like, oh, well, like that's not accessible. And it's like, well, what are you qualifying that? Like, you don't, like, there's no parameters for you to say that, like, looking at a piece of paper that the color contrast isn't acceptable when I designed it to be, so we were running into like issues like that. And then it obviously for websites, it's a whole other ball of wax, but
Yeah.
So yeah, this is my pet project.
Great.
We're happy to help you with any of it, Joe.
Yeah, that's really cool that you're taking this to heart. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
It's for this
Yeah.
stuff.
What?
Oh, sorry. For this stuff, I say to people, everything's fine till you get hacked. And then it's whatever it takes to fix it. And you should have been on the high-end, robust hosting to begin with. Same with this. All of a sudden, you get the letter, and then you're in reactive fix-it mode. And
Yeah, we're going to be proactive.
stay a step ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
Jonathan, tell us a little bit about Bionic Squid and what you're seeing. Have you run into this stuff with your agency or?
Yeah, I mean, I do, we do website development and design and online marketing and kind of a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
I have not seen any lawsuits, but I certainly have clients that are interested in this to a greater or lesser degree, and something that comes up periodically.
Yeah.
And, I had one client that is a library. They knew ahead of time that they had to have this built in. Other clients wouldn't even know what I was talking about if I brought this up to them.
That sounds like us.
Yeah. So, it comes up periodically. Certainly, if somebody asks, which doesn't happen very often, or if if it kind of comes to the fore of my consciousness, I will also bring it up. I have to admit, I don't always. I mean, I'm aware of it generally. I don't always make it a top priority to the extent that I should either. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to do things like this so I can remember to include that in my menu of things that I push to people.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also deliver a report every month too, with the monitoring. I don't know if you talked about that much, like the monitoring of the site.
I did a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I glazed over it a little bit.
And then it's just a good touch for your client too. It's like a marketing touch once a month as well. Yeah.
Is that a white label product, or is it something that they contract with you directly?
Either way.
Either way, yeah, we work both ways. So we could have we work on behalf of the agency, or we can work direct bill with their client. And it's just preference on the agency part.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'd certainly be interested in learning more about that. So when you send around the recording, or if you want to, I assume you're going to send some marketing material as well. I'd be interested to follow up on that.
Yeah, maybe we can do a private chat at one point.
Sure.
Be great. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else?
What else you get, Jill?
Hit 'em.
I know you got more. So Jonathan, just full disclosure, Jill's at Moore, which is in Watertown. They're a marketing company.
Okay.
And we're partners. We've worked with them on a number of websites where they do design and client interaction, and we're doing programming for them. So Jill and I know each other quite well from back many years at this point.
Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Mhm.
Did you guys do the original ThinkIt site? I think you did, right? No?
I don't.
Sorry.
One in 2013.
No, we didn't.
No.
It was
Rain-
Raincastle
Raincastle.
in Watertown.
No. That was something else. I don't know who did the first Think Kids.
I thought it was you guys. I thought that was the first project we did together, but maybe not.
Oh, that wasn't Rain Castle either. No, no, I don't think so. We definitely haven't worked with Think Kids before.
Mm.
It just feels like it because it's been a year on this one.
Yes. Yes, it has.
Yeah.
I
You
don't
can,
have any specific questions.
you can just Slack me if they come up.
Okay.
You know, for real. Like, and it's cool that you're looking at this stuff, and it's definitely something that you want to offer as part of your engagement, you know, going forward for sure. I think it could be a differentiator.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I know that like we've offered like using Think Kids as an example. We offered that
Yeah.
as an option, and you know, they did not want to pursue it. But then it's like, well, then they're just opening themselves as a part of MGH. Like I'm sure.
Yeah.
Oh, big
MGH would be
compliance.
like you have to comply to this. So
And potentially you too, right? You know, like that's the other thing. The example Lou brought up earlier was there was some what was the name of the business in Florida, Chris? The restaurants, Wet Willie's or something.
Release, yep.
Yeah. So it's like a Hooters knockoff place, but they had like multiple locations, and the restaurant site had website by Mike McKenna or whatever on the bottom,
Saber Digital or something.
and they nailed both of them separate lawsuits. So there was no protection for the designer, even if he had begged the site owner to do the accessibility thing. By having built something inaccessible, they went after them too. And that's not, Chris and I have talked about this. How do we deal with that when you're trying to get clients to do the right thing and they just don't care, they don't want to hear it?
We have over 200 websites we host, so it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like you'd need them to sign a consent form saying, like, I understand that this isn't accessible and I'm okay with that.
And I'm going to pay all of your legal fees when you're also sued for it, right? Because that's the thing.
Indemnification, but that might not cover you. Like you
It
said,
doesn't.
they can still, sue you direct. And that is the tricky client conversation where they're saying, I'm not spending $1 more, and it shouldn't cost you more. But the mindset of, well, we don't need to do that. It's like, yeah, then it's trouble. If something comes up.
I found like we have a guy here in town. he's like King Midas. Every restaurant he opens packs out. He's printing money. Super successful. We had 3 websites with him over the years that we had done, and I reached out to him about it, and he was like, "I'm so sick of dealing with these people with my restaurants." He's like, "I don't even want to talk about it. Don't talk to me about this." And that was the end of it. And he actually ended up moving in another direction entirely with his websites. But they're some of the worst I've seen for accessibility ever. And I've even reached out as a friend and said, hey, I know we're not, your web company anymore, but like, my brother worked for him in high school as a waiter. He's friends with my father-in-law. Like, we know the guy. And I said, you gotta do something here.
Take care of it, yeah.
Doesn't want to hear it. So you get guys like that, and then if you've built the site, you may have an agreement with a client that says, yeah, we get it, it's not your fault, but they can still do the underground and come right after you directly. That's the thing that, as an agency owner, keeps me up at night.
I was taking a note, error and omission insurance and all that kind of coverage.
Yeah.
Does this get covered under any particular parts? No.
Does not. It's like buying insurance for drunk driving.
Yeah, can't do it.
You get, you can't insure against non-compliance because you're supposed to do it.
I'm going to break this law. Can I just get some insurance to cover it in case?
Just in case. Yeah. My wife's in the insurance business, and she happens to have a big place in the Cape that got sued. So all the restaurants down there in Inns, and they couldn't get insurance for it either.
Yep.
All right, Jill, we probably kept it too long. Jonathan, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Hey, thank you
this
guys
was
for
great.
hanging
Thank you
in.
very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be in touch with our follow.
Thanks for joining. And Lou, thanks for working with Chris to get this set up. And if you have any other questions, use this as a resource. I mean, Jill, you know that obviously, but Jonathan, you too. If anything comes up, questions, we're pretty low pressure on the sales front of things. So if you really just have a question you need to answer, just hit us up and we can help you out.
That's great. Thank you. I will do that.
Of course.
All right.
Guys. Bye.
Bye.
So much.
Great.
Sure.
Hey,
Thanks.
guys.
Jill, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Chris, I'm gonna do I have a call with Kathy Fisher at 3:30.
Yep.
I'm just gonna stay on this.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll bail out now.
Yeah, no rush.
It went well.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah.
It was good. I mean, cool, people are cool and like, no worries with the time thing.
Yeah. And it's good to learn that though.
Yeah.
It's a good learning tool.
Yep. I upgraded mine a while ago because I kept running into that.
Oh, hey, I have the free package.
The best thing is we use it for the Tuesday morning elders
Yep.
prayer thing, and those guys are all retired and they can talk forever.
Oh, right.
And it was nice that we have the 40-minute thing, so they know they have to stop.
It's limited.
Say, okay, guys, we only got 5 minutes left. We're gonna wrap up.
Cool. All right, let's
All right.
check your email and stuff.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, thanks, man.
Yeah.